So what I'd like to do is to lead a meditation, and I'd like to tell you about the technique that we're going to do. And then we'll try it on. In this practice, this particular form of meditation, if you will, of insight meditation, you use some object as an anchor, as a point of concentration. And in this particular approach, we use the body and the sensations as our primary anchor. The mind, of course, wanders all over the place. The mind was once described as a drunken monkey stung by scorpions. Ooh. And you really get to see how your mind is constantly reacting. So we're training our attention to pay attention to something, and that is the experience of the body. Because the body doesn't live in the future, the body doesn't live in the past. The body is truly in the here and now. So any time that you can bring your attention back to the experience, you're truly right here and right now. It might be just for a microsecond, but it can be a very powerful way of coming home again. So the technique that we're going to do, and this will be somewhat truncated because we don't have a lot of time, will be to do a body scan. I'll be inviting you to pay attention to particular parts of the body, and you're not trying to make anything happen. You're not trying to invoke any particular state of consciousness. You're not trying to relax. What you're doing is you're coming in contact with the experience. Now, the interesting thing is that the parts of the body you might focus on, you might begin to feel some relaxation. You might feel a little more tingling. You might feel some subtle energy flow. That's a secondary manifestation. So I'll be guiding this body scan. The mind, of course, will wander. It's what the mind does. When you notice the mind far, far away, just bring it back to the last part of the body that you recall having in your attention. We'll be doing this kind of a modified body scan for a few minutes, and then I'll invite you to pay attention to some other senses. And we'll have just a little bit of time just to practice in silence on your own. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And you might like to lengthen your inhalation just a little bit. And on the exhalation, let yourself just soften and relax. And just for a few rounds of breath, you might lengthen the in-breath and relax on the out-breath. And just sense as best as you can this natural movement of the breath. Now releasing all control of the breath. Let the breath be utterly natural and easy. And as I mentioned a body part, you might let your attention move to that part of the body to sense what it feels like from the inside. Again, when the mind wanders, as it naturally will, just guide your attention back to your experience. Beginning with the scalp and the crown of the head. The forehead and temples. The eyes and the muscles around the eyes. And sensing through the muscles of the face, the cheeks and the jaw. And sensing from the inside the lips and the tongue. You might feel the weight and the length of your arms is sensing from your shoulder joints down through your elbows. And down through your wrists. The backs of your hands. The palms of your hands. Sensing the thumbs. And feeling and identifying each of the fingers. Feeling the lungs and the heart as you breathe. The belly and the lower abdomen. The lower back and the buttocks. And sensing from the inside down the length of the legs, from the knees down to the ankles, the hips to the knees. The tops of the feet and the toes. And the soles of the feet. Just sensing in your own way this quality of presence, this quality of being. Just feeling the aliveness of your body, the vibrations of the sounds around you. Feeling the texture of the air against your skin. And noticing where you feel the breath the most predominant inside as you breathe. There are two elemental questions that are the keystone of mindfulness. The first, what is your experience right now? And you might just sense inside the quality of feeling in the body, quality of your mood right now, quality of mind. And however you sense it, this quality of presence. The second question, can you let this be? Can you let this experience right now be just as it is, without adding anything or taking anything away? You might gently deepen your breath. And you might just feel the imprint, feel the effect of these minutes of guiding your attention inward, of shifting again and again from the cognitive to the direct experience. And you might, with your eyes closed, let your head drift a little bit to the left and to the right, just feeling the movement from the inside. And letting your body now begin to stretch, move in any way that feels good. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open, or if you like, you can remain with them closed. So did you feel some kind of a shift? Maybe a slowing down? Anyone realize how exhausted and tired you really are? Yes. That's called the whiplash meditation experience. What this practice does is it begins to reinforce a sense of self-observation. Rather than constantly reacting to what's happening, there's a sense of an observer of what's happening. And it can be quite profound. An interesting thing, because we tend to be so identified with our thoughts. I think it was, at least for the first 25 years of my life, I assumed the only reason I had a body was to make my head portable. It kind of got me going from place to place. And then I realized that actually the body is the doorway, it's the tool. Anytime you come back to the experience, you've made this dramatic shift from being identified with your thoughts to the sense of non-judging awareness, where new possibilities can arise. And with practice, this gets stronger and stronger, and you begin to realize over time as you practice that these thoughts come and go. And you begin to realize in practice that these 60,000 thoughts that you think every day, that most of them you thought yesterday. A lot of them, they're not really a lot of new thoughts, have you noticed? They're just kind of like recycling. And over a period of time, you begin to realize that you don't have to believe every thought as it arises. And this begins, again, to open up new possibilities. There's a wonderful model that I find very, very helpful. How do we experience our life? One model is that first there's just sensation in the body. You experience something in the body, and then the brain instantly interprets it as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then it reacts to that, and it kind of goes into a thought form. If you think the same thought over and over and over and over again, that thought calcifies into a belief. And if you're not aware of the belief, your belief will result in a habit. And if you're not aware of the habit will harden into your character. And if you're not aware of this in your character, that becomes your destiny. So we tend to spend most of our time hanging out on that level of thought and belief. And this practice is a very, very simple and not easy practice of coming back to the source, coming back to that direct experience. One of the definitions of meditation I find so helpful for myself, it's a two-part definition. First is to notice what's happening while it's happening. The second part of that definition is to notice your relationship to what's happening. And this is where it becomes very, very powerful. Not only as a healing tool, but a tool for transformation. Particularly when you find yourself caught. And again, this can be anything that you experience as between you and feeling free. We're talking a little more specifically this evening about depression and about working with pain. Depression is it's a state that can become incredibly severe and prolonged. It leads to all kinds of very uncomfortable manifestations of irritability, of anger. There can be kind of a quality of neediness, a quality of very, very deep self-criticism and doubt. This becomes a vicious cycle. That when your energy is spiraling down, then we tend to withdraw from the world more. You withdraw from the world. That kicks off another level of reactivity. And we find ourselves in a downward spiral. What meditation can do is it can help you move from a vicious cycle to a virtuous cycle. I'd like to tell you a little bit about a primary formula that has been extraordinarily helpful for me and for many other people. So a little story about how this formula works. This was someone who I was talking to, it's maybe a year or two ago. a woman who was combating a lot of depression and irritability and anger. And she was telling me how her daughter, her 7-year-old daughter, had 5 of her friends over for a party one afternoon. And you know how the decibel level can ramp up and the hyperactivity can ramp up. And it was getting louder and louder and louder, and she was feeling more and more out of control. And so she remembered in the middle of this formula. The formula, the acronym is RAIN, R-A-I-N. The R stands for recognizing or realizing what's happening. So in her irritability, she was very aware that, something was off. She just sort of paused and she said, okay, so what's happening? Can I name what's happening? And she said, I'm about to explode with anger. And so she sort of recognized that. That's a very, very helpful step. In the shamanic traditions, they say that when you can name a fear, you take its power away. I don't know if that's 100% true, but it helps you to disengage. When you can name it, as the saying says, you can begin to tame it. So she named that. The second part of this acronym, the A, stands for allowing or accepting. And so she asked, well, can I actually allow this? Can I accept this anger? And she wasn't so sure. So she kind of stepped out of the room, like, okay, well, let's see if I can make room for my experience here. The I is a very interesting element. The I stands for investigation with kindness, or intimacy. So the intimacy is actually, instead of turning your attention away, which is what we're wont to do with an unpleasant experience, if it feels safe, you can turn your attention right toward it. So she thought, okay, so let me take this time to investigate what's actually happening. Now, the primary investigation in this particular approach of meditation is the experience. Again, you're shifting from the story, I'm really angry, to the experience. And so she began to just sense inside, and she was very aware of her stomach was tight. She was aware her palms were sweaty, the back of her neck was hot. She felt this acidic feeling kind of in her gut, and this feeling like she was about to explode. But as she began to watch it, she noticed that it sort of crescendoed and it began to fade. And in the fading, it didn't totally go away. She asked herself, in part of the investigation, she asked herself, what do I need right now? And she said to herself, it just sort of popped up, she said, I need these girls to take a time out. And then right after that, she thought, I need a time out. And so she took a little bit of time just to sort of breathe and feel, and the wave kind of moved through. She felt a little more peace, a little more spaciousness. And she kind of entered back into this frenzy of activity with these 7-year-old girls. And the punchline to the story, and I always tear up, is the reason these girls were so excited was they were making a gift to give her. That's what this practice can do. It can move you out of reactivity into a whole set of new possibilities. And you can imagine the scenario if she went with her reactivity, but by recognizing her experience, sensing if she could allow it, make room for it, to actively investigate her experience, as non-judging as possible. It can lead you to the end part of the equation, which is a sense of non-identification, a sense of natural awareness. So her anger was very, very personal, but by stepping back, it shifted, it moved, and a wonderful experience emerged out of that. So there are these two elemental questions that you can ask yourself at any time. What is my experience right now? And can I let this be? These are the two wings of mindfulness. And they're extraordinarily helpful whenever you find yourself caught. Particularly if you find yourself caught in all the manifestations of a depressive state, all the manifestations of working with physical pain, emotional pain, or mental turmoil. So the investigation is a very, very important part of this. It's one of the distinctions of mindfulness meditation. It's not just about being aware of the breath. It's that when you uncover something that is particularly unpleasant or something that doesn't sort of change on its own, you can actually turn your attention to it. The primary source of investigation is what it feels like on the inside. But you can also explore what you're believing. And we'll hopefully have a little bit of time to touch on to that. You can explore the thoughts and the beliefs that are associated with whatever you may be working with. But I'm aware of our time, and I want to touch on some strategies for working with pain. This, to me, is one of the most applicable things when it comes to meditation, when you're experiencing physical pain. And again, emotional pain always has a physical component to it. You can think of emotion as a sensation in the body with a label from the mind. There's a lot of research now being done on trauma. When you experience trauma, there's kind of the big T trauma and the little t trauma. But the essence of trauma is a combination of two things, of fear and helplessness. Anytime you experience fear and helplessness, your system will go into a reaction phase. And the classical forms of reaction are fight, flight, and freeze. Either you'll find yourself moving into judgment, anger, blame, aggression, or you'll find yourself disassociating, or you just freeze up inside. It can be really subtle, it can be really big, depending on that level of trauma. And we all have trauma. We've all experienced different forms of pain, both physical and emotional. Now, the interesting thing about meditation is that you begin to become more aware. You also become more sensitive. A good friend of mine, I was speaking with him about a year ago, and he seemed really, really happy. I've known him for quite a few years, and I said, so how do you explain your happiness? He said, well, about 15 years ago, he said, I was in the finance industry living in New York, and I hated my life. And I went to a therapist. And the therapist said, learn to meditate, you'll feel better. So he said, I got really excited, and I went off to learn how to meditate. And I went to a training, and then I went to an intensive retreat. But boy, during that intensive retreat, all I experienced was sadness and anger and depression. And right after the retreat, I went back to my therapist, and I said, what the heck were you talking about? You told me I'd feel better, but all I could feel was anger, sadness, and depression. His therapist smiled and said, yeah, you feel anger better, you feel sadness better, you feel depression better. When you practice meditation, you will feel better. You will feel everything better. The good news is you become more sensitive. The bad news, you become more sensitive. But part of the beauty of it is when you practice meditation, it's almost as if you're putting things in neutral. And inevitably, what will begin to arise are all the unhealed parts. Those old traumas just come to the surface, looking for attention, looking for some empathy, for some compassion. It's a natural part of the process. We can apply it in many, many ways that are very, very skillful, but there's a transformative quality to meditation, which is quite extraordinary. But one of the practical applications is working with physical pain, or the pain associated with emotional pain. When you're working with trauma, when you're working with pain, you may have noticed that when you experience physical pain, how your mind will fixate on that pain. Have you noticed? It just goes there. You ever been to the dentist and have a they kind of drill out a cavity and your tongue just keeps going to the hole? You can't stop it. Like our positive experiences, are like Teflon. Our negative experiences are like Velcro. The mind just moves, it fixates on those unpleasant sensations.